Okay, now we're continuing this series called Searching for the Kingdom, and as we move into today, I gotta say, I'm still not sure what's gonna happen today. I am praying and trusting God will guide some words here and that this will be edifying. It's gonna be a little bit different kind of a message. I would say, I'm a little at loss as what I need to say, what should be said. I just know that there's a lot that we need to address and deal with. And what I'm talking about is, as we've been talking about the church in America, and anyone who's paying attention at all knows that the church is going through some major changes. Things are changing, and things are changing fast. Now, I've said this before, you know me, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, full-fledged, tried and true, to the core, church-going type person. Grew up in the church, and even despite almost a decade in California, I grew up in this church. This is a church I started in the nursery and worked my way up till I got to this spot, I guess. That's how that works. And I've said that before, I love the church. And as long as the Lord allows, we'll continue to do what we can to try to build this church and build this church better. I think that's our instructions even. And we'll keep working on that. But along the way, we see that the church is changing. What's interesting, though, is it's not just the church. Okay, so we need to, I think, first just kind of wrestle with the idea that our whole culture and our whole country is changing, and changing so rapidly. It's every industry, it's every organization, it's every institution across the land. Every American system out there is going through dramatic kind of reorganization. Many of you are probably aware that my mother-in-law passed away a couple weeks ago. She'd be mad that I called her my mother-in-law. Not because she thinks that I'm Sandy's greatest mistake in her life. Maybe at the beginning, I don't know. But because she always said I was her son, and I was always, she was always my mother. We had a great relationship. But near the end, when she got sick, she ended up going to the hospital. But before that, when she got sick, a nurse came out and checked her out. And she says, I think we need to call them mobile urgent care. So mobile urgent care came out, and they gave her breathing treatments. They were checking her heart. They were doing her vitals. They were doing all kinds of stuff. And this mobile urgent care truck is actually really incredible. They can give injections. They can start IVs. They can do x-rays. They can do ultrasounds. They can do all this stuff right in your home. Eventually, they said, okay, you're just not getting better. And even though, they're doing IVs and breathing treatments were kind of the main things that she needed. They're doing all that. She wasn't improving. So they said, we think you need to go to the hospital. You're going to need more care. So they took her off. Well, we go to the ER, and this was kind of the interesting thing. The ambulance takes her to the ER. They put her in the bed, and we're waiting. And then a doctor and a nurse come in and said, well, what brings you in today? And we said, well, it's about her breathing. And they said, well, what's going on? And we said, well, the mobile urgent care has already checked her out and told us to come into the hospital. The doctor and the nurse said, what is mobile urgent care? They had never heard of it. It's something that's so brand new. It was the first time they'd heard of this, that they actually have an urgent care system that goes out to the house now. So it's every industry. Everybody is trying to figure out the changes that are going on in our world. And if there's one constant in this, it's only that change is happening and that change is speeding up. Here's a little walk down memory lane. Maybe you remember some of these brands that at one point ruled our world in their industry or in their area, and today are completely gone. So here, the first one, we'll go back a little, Remington typewriters. Anybody ever use a Remington typewriter? I don't know if I have. I've used typewriters, but I kind of started with electric typewriters. That's where I started. So Remington completely gone. First replaced by the electric, and then, of course, the computer. I remember there was a boy that came in to his grandfather one day, and he'd been on a field trip. He said, "Grandpa," and this is a true story. He was a pastor. His grandpa was a pastor. He says, "Grandpa, you wouldn't believe what I saw today. It was a computer that went straight from keyboard to hard copy in one step." He'd just seen his first typewriter. So instead of a computer and it on the screen and fixing and then printing it out, he was amazed by this incredible technology. The next one, City Circuit, or Circuit City rather, they were the number 2 electronic store in the country, and today you won't find a single store left. Not a single store. Now here's how most of us spent Friday night. Wandering for hours in Blockbuster, looking around, thousands of videos and nothing to watch. Growing in, aisle after aisle. These ones, I don't know if anybody owned a Sony Ericsson cell phone. They were kind of the first merger of 2 cell phone manufacturers, and so they became the top cell phone making company in the country at that time. And then, but now the company, Sony Ericsson's completely gone. And even Sony, I was thinking, I don't believe they even make cell phones anymore. This is kind of interesting. Now, Napster. Napster, most of us know as the company that got in trouble for sharing stolen, pirated, or whatever music. But the Napster story, where it really started, was they were the first one to create the technology that allowed kind of site sharing large files. Now, what it was used for was sharing all across the internet. It was sharing music. But they were the first one to create a system, a sharing point where large files could be downloaded and then shared with others. Now, that system still is a major cornerstone in the internet today, but Napster, of course, is gone. Now, because of Napster and the sharing of music, these guys are now gone. Tower Records, the largest record store in the country, is now completely shut down. And we were talking about this the other day. The only record store really left in our city that we know of, or I know of, there's, I think, a couple of stores that only sell like vintage stuff. 10,000 Holes on Monroe, and there's another one on Hamilton, and so on. On and on it goes, and then last one, imagine how these guys, their world changed. When the digital camera came out, the world's changing. We're trying to understand a little bit of this today. We could look at on and on, all the changes, all the different places where things are rapidly changing, and so on. The other thing is, as these changes come along, we also have hours and hours of debate to kind of walk through to figure out what the changes mean, whether they're good, how we respond, all those kinds of things, right? Are these changes helpful? Do they make us better as a people? What do we do with this? As we're kind of lamenting the things that are gone that maybe we grew up with or we were used to. We also are looking at new opportunities and new possibilities. And so there's all kinds of this discussion around that. What does it all mean to us? But our purpose here today is what we want to do is discuss a little bit some of these changes and how they're dramatically impacting the church. Now, the same debates, discussions, even disagreements exist around what these changes mean. I'm not here to really answer those debates. I just want to give you some of the background and some of the understanding, and then we will forever spend time trying to figure out what that means. I also want to say, before I get into some of this, is when I say church, I'm largely talking about the gathering of the church like this in this location, or like thousands of others, tens of thousands of other churches like ours scattered across the country, trying to figure out what life for the church in America looks like and means. So I'm talking about the church building, the church gathering, the church people, okay, church small c, which honestly, is probably what most of us think about most of the time. That's part of this whole series, that we tend to think too small. We only think of our walls. But so we're gonna continue to deal with that as we then later look outwards. We realize the kingdom is a part of the larger church capital C, the bigger C. But as we move through this, we recognize that these changes are dramatically changing what the local church gathering looks like and what's happening. And it seems as though pretty much every person in North America who wants to be in church already is. Everybody that wants to be in church already is pretty much here, because we're not seeing churches grow anymore. Even the larger churches are not really seeing growth. They're seeing people leave other churches and come to their church. But even then, they're seeing people stay there for about 4 to 5 years and then move on because they finally get bored and they're looking for the next church or the next opportunity, or quit going to church at all. So everybody who wants to be a part of church already pretty much is in church. And so here's my working thesis for today, that we have to begin moving from a church member mindset to a kingdom missiology. So we need to move away from being church members to kingdom missiologists. Now, if you want to know who came up with this great word of wisdom, okay, this comes from this guy. Okay, this is me. This is only me. This is what I'm saying. This is just my great pearl of wisdom this morning as I think about the church and the changes and what it means and what we're supposed to do about it. So take it with a grain of salt, just consider it. But what I mean by this, moving from a church member mindset to a kingdom missiologist, means that we need to move beyond just trying to figure out things like church growth. How can we get more people to be here? How can we build better churches? How can we create new programs that will attract new people? How can we keep people entertained? How can we move beyond a church-centric story where the majority of our Christian experience is centered around what happens to us in the church, doing church things with church people? And how can we have a story that begins to proclaim and celebrate the great things that God is doing beyond our church or in places other than our church? And we begin seeing kind of a shift that moves us from this little c mindset that's kind of small-minded to the big C church mindset that sees beyond our gathering. Missiologist Reggie McNeil, and if we have time, we might watch a short video from him later on. He said this: "We're on the cusp of the largest church realignment since the Reformation." So the Reformation was, this is a little bit scary, it was so dramatic that people actually died to bring those changes into the church. Luther died because he thought that he could put Bibles in the hands of Christians. And they killed him for it. If he's right, he's saying we're on the next shift that is so dramatic, the church hasn't seen anything like it since that Reformation time. Yeah, some of us are ready for it. We think, we hope, maybe, but we'll see where it goes. Now, all that being said, which is really nothing said so far, is I feel a little bit like the end of the movie The Matrix. Neo, that's a sci-fi movie about the world being taken over by machines, and humans are trying to rise up to stop them. And at the very end of the movie, Neo says this. He says, "I know you're afraid now. You're afraid of us. You are afraid of change." He says, "I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it is going to begin." And that's all I'm really saying. I don't know what any of this means yet. Most of us don't. In fact, as you think about those brands that changed and are now gone, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've moved into the digital age. And we've seen certain periods of time in history where new technology has completely changed the face of the country, the world. You know, going all the way back to like the beginning of the Iron Age, and how that changed everything. It changed war, it changed industry and building and so on. You know, the age that we're kind of on the end of, that we were all growing up in, was the information age at the starting of the printing press 300-400 years ago. And now with books available to everybody, it ushered in the new information age, and that had a dramatic impact upon our culture around the whole world. We are only 10 or 15 years into the digital age, and no one has any concept or idea of what it really is going to mean in terms of change. We're beginning to see massive change, and it's just the start. It's just the beginning of it. So we have a long way to go. But to maybe get our heads around a little bit of this, what I want to bring to you today is kind of a quick kind of flyby look at the generations that are living in America today and how they've changed over the last 100 years or so. I find this fascinating. I've been trying to learn about this. I've been reading some stuff and watching some stuff and listening to some educators and all that. I am by no means an expert in this topic, and so what I'm going to give is just a real brief summary. But go ahead and throw that slide up, if you will, about this, what's it say, 6 different generations. So these are the generations that are still living today, beginning with the GI generation down through the kids or babies being born. And as we think about each one of these generations, they have some very distinct characteristics about them as a people or as a group, as a cohort, if you will. Some kind of defining and unifying qualities. Going back, and really the GI generation and the builder generation, obviously the oldest living generations, and I'll put them kind of together. There's a lot of similarities between them. These are your grandparents, or maybe great-grandparents for some of you, maybe great-great-grandparents for the kids downstairs. I think that'd be about right. But these are the ones that really were at the kind of in the industrial age and were the builders of the country, right? They were ushering in industry. They were building buildings. They were defending the country in war. And so they were really the ones who were raising up our country and helping it to become kind of the world power that it is today. Some of the unifying characteristics were sacrifice and duty. They laid their lives down for their country. What the most important thing to this generation was building a great country, and they're often referred to as the greatest nation. They built capitalism. They built the industrial age. They built up they are the ones that began the concept of retirement. You worked faithfully for a company for 30, 40 years or whatever. You built up retirement, and then there was a security in being able to live off of that. And then into the builders, more specifically, not that the builders they were also building new organizations and systems and companies and all that, but they really started becoming the managers of what was built, right? So they were becoming, politics are really expanding at this time. They were taking over for their parents. And what's really interesting about this early generation is the most important thing to them was that they were handed a culture, and they needed to be faithful to protect it and to preserve it. They were now in charge, and they needed to manage it well. They needed to take care of it. They needed to make sure it still existed for the generations that followed them. And so this sense of loyalty and duty and patriotism is hugely important to older generations. Now you move beyond them into the baby boomer era. And it was said that when World War II was over and all those servicemen came home, 9 months later to the day, the baby boom began. And there's an explosion in population, and they lived in a time of a lot of prosperity as a country. So industry is really working. You know, they were in an age when there's never more modern age, and really what started to take over was consumerism. They could now buy things that their parents and grandparents never even dreamed of. They were, interesting enough, they were very hard workers. The baby boomers were really hard workers. And they invented, so if the generations before them invented retirement, what they invented was the 60 to 80 hour work week. And they were just working all the time and amassing wealth. And so they had money to buy more stuff. It's an interesting time for the baby boomers. Their self-worth was measured in accomplishment, in what they owned. They probably invented the suburbs, I'm thinking. That's probably around that time. You know, pick a nice little house outside of town with a white picket fence around it and so on. They were starting to really build into on education, climbing the corporate ladder. And so success was a real driving point of this generation. Well, because of that, now they're working so much and they have so much, they had to start outsourcing their life to get more help. And so the daycare industry is born. Restaurant industry is born. If you could afford to hire a neighbor kid to come mow your lawn for $5, you did that. If you could get help with birthdays, you hired some people to do that, or at least you went and bought a birthday cake or whatever. Maids, gas station attendants, grocery stores are exploding. On and on and on. This is really the beginning of the service industry because they needed help getting all this stuff done in their life because they're working so much. This had some profound impact because they're also outsourcing the raising of their kids. So now kids are growing up in daycares and schools. Now the family doesn't have a lot of time together at night. The dinner table is almost non-existent. And there's a lot of changes that are happening. In the church, during this time, pastors are becoming more and more professional. You're hiring children's workers and youth ministers to teach your children about spiritual things and be responsible for spiritual formation. It wasn't happening in the home anymore. It was happening only at the church. And you can just imagine the impact that had. And especially thinking about moving into Generation X. That's kind of my generation growing up. If you're born between 65 and 83, this would be kind of where you're at. Growing up here in this generation, thinking back, the kids here are mostly on their own. They had to they're latchkey kids that had to take care of themselves now. You had to get home from school on your own. You had to, maybe keep yourself busy until mom and dad got off of work. You were, maybe you're making your own breakfast in the morning or even fending for yourself for snacks in the evening or whatever. But largely this generation had to become self-reliant and become very self-independent. This is the first generation that was not expected to outperform their parents or grandparents before them. They were not expected to exceed them in materialism or wealth or in building new things. And so the me generation is really born in that concept because they had to be responsible for themselves. So I got to take care of myself. I'm taking care of me. I become kind of the center of everything. And the Generation X, it seems, really became dependent upon themselves and were having a harder and harder time seeing that they were a part of a larger collective, a larger group. Loyalty and duty that was everything that the older generations are about, now a couple generations later is almost gone. They had a lot of dysfunction in their family because parents weren't around. My generation has a lot of distrust for authority. They've seen a lot of families breaking up through divorce, and they're really struggling. They did tend to strive towards higher levels of education, but they really didn't want the kind of life that their parents showed them, and so they worked really hard at trying to develop a better balance between work and family time and family life. And so their unifying motto, if there is one, was kind of work smarter, not harder. Boy, and I just thought that's something I've heard a lot about. Now for the church, again, loyalty and duty in this generation has been cast out the window. Instead, it became about what can I get? What programs will serve me? What programs will do things for me? And so the church has moved into a very attractional ministry mindset and model to where if we can build better churches, then people will come back. And it seems as though we were just so desperate to convince millennials and younger generations that this is not the church of your parents. It's okay, it's safe to return. And that's kind of been our driving force. Last one, because the Nexters and Gen Alpha, they're too young to really kind of know this look. So we'll just look at this last one, the millennials. And this is a generation that we're probably all trying to figure out and get our heads wrapped around what it all means. And one of the interesting things is, now that they've come through the boomers and now they've come through the millennials, this generation is finding a lot of independence and a lot of dysfunction in their childhood and their upbringing. And so what's interesting is the concept of a normal family is almost completely gone. Single parent families, blended families, broken families, gay families, merged families, multi-generations living together, people moving in and out. You've got families that are just conveniences of different people living together because they have to. All kinds of, there is no unifying sense of what a family is anymore in the culture for millennials. Every family is completely different, and the Leave It to Beaver family is just gone. We don't see it anymore, almost. And so they're growing up at all the dysfunction in family. They're growing up at dysfunction and fighting in government. They're growing up looking at institutions. They're growing up and looking at organizations and the media and everything they have and so on. And they're wondering why the greatest nation in the world can't fix some of the problems that we have. And again, I don't want to offer a lot of answers at this moment because that's where we would really start dividing, right? I'm just saying we just need to understand what is happening and try to get our minds wrapped around this a little bit. But they are asking those kinds of questions. How can we still have so many problems? And depending on where you're sitting, what chair you're sitting in, you might think the problems are getting worse. Some might say the problems are getting better. There's such division and confusion around all this. And so these millennials are looking around going, I can't trust anybody in authority or anybody in organization or anybody in leadership to really guide the way anymore because it's not working. And they have no foundation to build their life upon. There is a huge distrust over just about every institution in the country. And for Gen Xers and millennials, they feel like their only choice is to go through life taking what they can get and then moving on, right? I'm going to work at a job for a year or two until I get enough money to go back to college or to get a better job. Everything in life becomes a stepping stone to something better because they feel like that's the only hope of getting anywhere. They may go to college, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are not increasing their education. A lot of them they're not interested in corporate ladder climbing. There's 1,000 seats between them and the top of that ladder, and they just have no interest in climbing it because they don't feel it'll get anywhere. So they're very happy just doing a lower pressure, lower responsibility job so they can have more time with their family, that they're trying to do better than what they've seen from their parents. And millennials are extremely interested in relationships, social concern, and the world is shrinking very, very fast. And so globalism is extremely important as well. Okay, so there's just a little look. Now, why is this important? I think all of us, and if you're an older generation or a younger generation, I think all of us have a bit of a tendency to think that we're right, they're wrong. And all of us have a tendency to think that, the values that are important to us are what's missing in this world today. And if we can just get everybody to come to our side, we can get back on track and maybe the church will be full again. Okay, if you love the church, that's kind of your motivation. If we can get everybody back on track, let's just get the church filled up again. And what we need to spend at least some time doing is trying to understand the culture in which we live so that maybe we can have some effectiveness again. It's like sending a missionary over to another country. Before they ever go, they're going to spend months, if not years, in language school, learning traditions, trying to find out about the people that they're going to try to reach. Not so that they can take the American church and replant it there, but so they can become a part of the culture and try to make an impact for Jesus Christ. And we are beginning to realize, I've said this a few times now, that America is the largest English-speaking mission field in the world. We are living right in the middle of one of the greatest mission fields in the world. So if we want to have any impact at all, we need to be careful about vilifying the other generations and try to learn about how these generations and cultures are different. Maybe we can connect with them in some way. Maybe we can move in. Now, if you're an older generation, you're saying, man, this guy's been talking for 20 minutes, he hasn't even mentioned the scriptures yet. I didn't even have to go to church today. If you're a millennial, you're probably saying, this is the greatest sermon I've ever heard. This is fantastic. So let me give you a scripture in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. Yeah, that's right. I got to cover it all. And I won't take long to unpack it all. I just want to close with a comment. But Paul says this, 1 Corinthians 9:19. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews, I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those who are outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. He says, I become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in this blessing. Now, as we think about that, what Paul is saying is, if I was around Jewish people, I'd do what they did. I'd act like them. I'd eat what they'd eat. I'd talk like them and use their language. So it's kind of like when I'm with the church folks, I put on the three-piece suit. I carry my great big King James Bible, and I give a good sermon. But when I'm walking around the street and I'm with non-church people, I'm with the non-Jews, okay, I put on my ripped jeans. I learn a little bit about the kind of music that think's popular. I jump onto Facebook, and except if you're still on Facebook, you're probably old. Sorry, I hate to tell you. It's not Facebook anymore, okay? And I think Snapchat's coming around a little bit, but now it's not even Twitter so much. I think I'm hearing, I don't know. It's on Instagram and TikTok. Those are the big deals, and so we've moved on. So if you're on Facebook, you've missed the boat already. Well, Paul's saying, I'm trying to get involved in the culture so that I can meet people where they're at. He was a missiologist. He wanted to learn about the people he's trying to reach. Now, as church folks, we read this and we instantly assume that this is permission to start living sinful life. We get worried about, this is immorality. People are just going to do whatever they want, and they're going to claim that they're being cultural and all that. But you go back and you read the chapter, and what Paul's saying is, you know what I did? I laid down all my rights. I laid down my agenda. I lay down my wants. I lay down my expectations so that I can try to reach some for Jesus Christ. I'll save some more for next week, including that video. We're not going to get to it, so come back next week to watch the video. But I'll close with this story. I don't know if anybody's watched the movie Overcomer. Great Christian movie put on by Sherwood Pictures. Just watched it this last week for the first time. And so you learn pretty early on that the lead guy in the movie is a football coach, and he's excited that the next year is going to be their year. They got the seniors in place. They've got the right players. They've really built a solid team. They're not really losing any important players. And so next year was going to be their year. Unfortunately, kind of an economic downturn hits the community, and families start moving away, and he loses all of his important players. In fact, they almost shut the football program down because they can't afford it anymore. But cross country doesn't cost anything, so they need him to take over as coach of the cross country team. So the football coach becomes a cross country coach, and only one girl shows up for the program, and she's got asthma. And all of his dreams and all of his hopes and all of his plans, everything is just gone. And he is destroyed about the whole thing. He is upset. He feels like he has no purpose left in life and so on. And you know where it's going. He finds out, through the story, that this young girl becomes so much more than a football game. And the investment he can make for Jesus Christ in her life is profound. And I have to believe that as we are searching for the kingdom, what God is calling us to is so much more than these four walls. And that if we are stuck in hanging on to our church, we've got a lot of hurt and heartache ahead. But if we believe that God still has a plan and a purpose for us as the church, we might be seeing some of the greatest opportunities and ministries that have come around in generations. And I believe God's calling us to the greater thing. Father, we just give you thanks for